Hello, everyone, and welcome to Content Therapy Live. Today, I have Paul Chaney with me today. He is a content therapist and the president of Prescriptive Writing. You guys know me, Arnelle, Pierre-Louis, content marketer for RepCap. And today, me and Paul are doing Content Therapy Live, and we are super excited to be doing this. Paul, would you like to just quickly introduce yourself? Really quick intro. Nothing too
Yeah,
big.
sure. And it probably bears mentioning I'm not a licensed content therapist.
Yes,
Okay,
we're
that was
not
a joke.
licensed.
I'm not
We can
licensed.
help you with the content stuff, but
I
anything
have
else.
I have gone through therapy a few times, but not for content. It's for other things. But no, I'm a freelance, primarily B2B writer, editor. I have taught digital marketing courses. And things like that. So just is whatever I need to do to make a buck, basically, that involves content and marketing. I've been doing it for quite a long time, actually, over 25, probably more like 26 years. I won't, before Google was there, I was doing this stuff. So in one form or another, I have a little one-person operation called Prescriptive Writing, and I create content that, again, is focused on B2B. And I like to put it this way. And I don't say this in any kind of disparaging way, but the more boring, the better. So, if it's boring B2B, that's the kind of stuff I like writing about. So, anyway, that's pretty much me. Yep.
All right. The boring, the better. I'll make sure to remember that.
Maybe that should be my tagline. The more boring, the better. I don't know.
I
But,
mean, hey, it'll catch your people's attention, so it works.
yeah,
So
they might not want to think of their particular business as boring, but
that is
anyway.
true.
Yeah.
That is very true. But so as content marketing has evolved, marketers face more opportunities and challenges as they stay up to date with the industry current trends. So since the start of this advice column, it has served as a refuge for content marketers looking for an outside perspective on their current situations. We've covered so much, from quiet firing to tackling the copywriter versus content marketer debate. And today we are answering any questions that you may have live. So I'm going to encourage everybody to drop any questions that you may have in the chat. But before we get there and we answer your questions, we're actually going to be looking back at some of our most popular questions and answering them live for you guys. So, Paul, are you ready?
Ready or not, here we go.
Just remember, guys, drop your questions in the chat. We would love to answer all of them.
Yeah, just make them easy. Make it softball questions. It'd be better. No, challenge me if you like. It's okay.
Yeah, really challenge him. It's okay. So our first question actually comes from somebody who went viral, just not for the right reasons.
Yeah.
So the question reads, my team and I worked hard to produce a content marketing campaign to launch our new product. We worked for months to get the right messaging, images, videos, and promotional plan for the campaign launch. I was thrilled and excited when we finally released it and could go to bed without dreaming about that campaign. But then the following day, I woke up to many notifications, including several from our CEO. I saw one message and everything sank. We went viral, but it wasn't good. It turns out that that messaging we used sparked a heated debate on whether or not we supported specific demographic groups who happen to be a significant part of our customer base. We never intended to exclude or share a negative message about our customers. And although we've taken the materials down, I'm not sure what the next logical step is. I've been a part of other content teams before, but this is the first time I've dealt with this scrutiny. How can I deal with the aftermath of this failure without giving it the old corporate apology? Sincerely, viral content marketer.
Yeah, I hate it when that happens. No, that is something to be taken seriously, obviously. And, but I would say to the person, don't beat yourself up. Yours is certainly not the first brand or company to suffer from a marketing campaign that went wrong. I mean, some of the biggest brands on the planet, McDonald's, Pepsi, Amazon, they've all fallen prey to this kind of thing. I would also say, in sort of a way of offering a little bit of comfort, if you would, that, let's just make sure that this was your mistake and not just somebody with an axe to grind out there, because there are those people. But let's be fair, and let's just say maybe it was. Okay. So what do you do? I think the first order of business is to listen to the audience. What are they saying about what you did? We like to judge ourselves by our intentions. Others judge us by our actions. You had good intentions. You did not mean to offend or off-put anyone. It just happened. So I think what you need to do, first of all, is just really listen, because listening breeds understanding, and a lack of understanding is really at the root, I think, of so many mistakes. The other thing you need to do is, aside from listening, is really assess the situation. Take a moment, step back, breathe deeply and say, why are people upset? What are the reasons? Are we indeed responsible? And if we are, in what ways? And what can we do differently the next time? Obviously, if it is a mistake, you need to acknowledge that. Now, that does not mean, the old, CEO corporate apology thing where he gets on YouTube video and says how sorry he or she is. It may not need that, but some form of acknowledgement probably is called for. So I wouldn't shy away from it. But at the same time, I would also right size the mistake. And by that, I mean, how serious was it? If it was, some small thing, okay, admit it, but maybe you could do it even with a little bit of humor thrown in there. Now, you got to be careful about that, obviously. But if it was truly offensive, it was a big thing, reiterate your brand's mission, promise to make amends, and don't beat around the bush doing it. Okay. Don't delay. The longer you delay, I think the worse it could get, the more this could escalate. And another thing that you may not think about doing is to express gratitude. Maybe the tendency might be to have a knee-jerk defensive sort of reaction, but instead express gratitude to those you offended by pointing out your error. The good book says a soft answer turns away wrath. Or turns away anger. So, just say, hey, we're sorry. Thank you for pointing this out to us. Simple as that. And then if you have to think about this, but if the campaign was worth doing to begin with, maybe it's worth doing over just the right way. And I think a great way to approach this would be invite some of those folks who were your critics into the room, sit down with them, and maybe it's a virtual room like this, sit down with them and talk it over. What can we do to make this better? How can we do this again, but the right way? The way I like to think of it is this: whether you're a B2C brand or a B2B brand, you're still an H2H brand. That is to say, human to human. And as humans, we make mistakes. So again, don't beat yourself up too much. Learn from your mistake, dust yourself off, and keep going. Because I think that's probably about the best any of us could do.
You're right. But I did have a question kind of going back, because you've mentioned that a lot of these big brands like Pepsi and Coca-Cola, McDonald's, they've all been through some type of controversy. At least they go at least a couple months without one controversy. So, but what about the smaller brands? I feel as though smaller brands, they take a lot more heat, because they don't have the backing of, yes, there's going to be controversy, but people are still going to purchase from these bigger companies. Whereas for the smaller companies, that's not necessarily a guarantee. So how would a smaller company deal with this?
In all honesty, I don't see that those steps that I sort of advise would necessarily need to be different. True, you don't have sort of the comfort zone of knowing that there are millions of people who are still going to buy your products, regardless of, of this subset who maybe won't, unless you take some action. Obviously, your customer base is smaller. Maybe it's more regionally defined. For example, what do? I think you do the same thing. But I think there's also and I'm just thinking out loud here, but I think there's some advantage for smaller brands, because maybe you're closer to your customers. Maybe there is a bit more of a personal connection, and having that, sit down with those folks can be even more meaningful to you. But I think all in all, what I just said, the listening, the assessing, acknowledgement, those kind of things, expressing, appreciation and gratitude. All of those things would still hold true for a smaller brand as well as, one of the mega brands.
Okay. Awesome. I love that answer to that, because it is true. A lot of it would still hold true for no matter the size, but you can't not say that smaller brands do get a little bit more heat, because it's more of the culture of being like a small business owner, and like how there could be an assumption that being a small business owner, you're more connected to the audience.
Right.
And
well, I look at it this way, the old adage, you can please all of the people some of the time and some of the people all of the time, but you can't please all the people all the time. And, that's maybe a bit of a cliche, but I think that there's wisdom there, because if you're in business and particularly if you're, consumer facing, you're customer facing in the sense of maybe a B2C type thing, let's just say retail, for example, you're going to mess up from time to time. You don't mean to, but you just do the best you can to make it right by the person or parties that you've offended. And I think the best way to do that is to start by listening, have a conversation. And you'll probably hear me say that many times during the course of our time together today. Listening, having a conversation is some of the best ways to, bring the problem to light and try to solve it.
I like that. Cliche or not, it's still very true in any aspect. So we'll definitely go with that. So we are actually going to go to our next question. And guys, remember, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We will answer them. But now this is coming from somebody who I feel like what they're asking is a topic that has been a very hot topic within recent months. So let's get into this question. So this next question goes, everything was good when I started my job a year and a half ago. We talked about the path that I wanted to take in my career, and with the company, I received substantial feedback and praise from my supervisors and could have one-on-ones with them. However, all of that slowly started to go away about 8 months into this role. I was put on the sidelines for many projects for which I was qualified. Relevant information I needed to do my job was either not shared with me, or I was made to figure it out independently. And I've only gotten a small raise while my peers have gotten substantial increases. All of this has left me feeling incompetent in my abilities and unappreciated. I love this company's work and want to do more, but what can I do to change the situation? How should I prepare to address this situation with my manager and get to the root of what's going on? Sincerely, quietly firing.
Oh boy. Well, I have actually no opinion about this. No, I'm kidding. I actually have quite an opinion about this. Obviously this term quiet firing I think it's sort of a recent iteration, right? But I don't think this is a practice that is new by any means. I think it's been going on a long time. It just didn't have a catchy term to associate it with it. But for me, using passive aggressive tactics to try to sort of tacitly fire someone or in hopes that they might quietly quit. That's another term you're hearing now. To me, that's the epitome of cowardice. And I would say, shame on you as an employer if that's a tactic that you're using. But that's not really the question. The question is, I feel like I might be a victim of this. What can I do? And I think there's several things you could do, actually. One of the things that you should do, and I actually mentioned this question to my wife when it came to me some weeks or months ago, and she's a very wise person. And she said this, well, first of all, tell them not to make assumptions. Maybe quiet firing is not what's happening. Maybe what's happening is that the leadership just lacks good management skills. So you are being overlooked for that reason, But aside from that, if you feel like, yeah, there's some things going on here that really do sort of point to this, and maybe there are, certainly, I would think that one of the things you want to do is find some examples that are citable. What are some concrete, specific examples that you could cite? Document those examples. Keep a record of those examples, not just so you can add fuel to the fire, because you know this could be an emotional thing for you, and you want to try to distance yourself from that as much as possible. Okay, because once you start documenting, if these things are adding up, you know, it could, you know, hurt you in a sense, right? Emotionally. But one of the things you're going to want to do, I think, is go talk to somebody. Again, that conversation thing. Talk to your manager or your supervisor. Bring out any of these examples that you feel might be relevant. At the same time, I think you really have to step back and use some good judgment and say, and what I'm presenting going to present me as someone who's petty or a whiner or something like that. So you really have to think about, are these examples that I'm presenting, you know, are they valid enough? And then I would say, again, meet with the person who, you know, your supervisor, your manager, give them these examples, express your concerns, stand up for yourself, be your own best advocate, you know, but don't do it in a hostile sort of finger pointing kind of way, you know, be respectful, try to remain calm. That's why you try to have to, you know, keep the emotional side out of this kind of thing. And I think that leads to something else too, and that is take an inventory of your own attitude and your performance. You know, someone said to me one time, you can't read the label from the inside of the jar. And by that, he meant it's hard for us to be objective about ourselves, right? So how about this? Go find a trusted coworker, friend, and just ask them, you know, hey, I feel like this is happening. Am I doing anything in your mind? Am I doing anything that might contribute to that? And ask that they be objective and honest with you. You know, if there's some things on your side of the table that you need to address that might change the equation, maybe poor work performance, maybe a poor attitude. You don't want to come across as a complainer, for example, right? You know, take an inventory of those things. But again, I think getting a trusted coworker's opinion might be good. But also think about this. If this, in your mind, borders on discrimination, maybe you're an older worker and there's sort of ageism involved or age discrimination. Well, that's a problem. And you need to definitely talk to somebody, human resources, about that. Or perhaps, I'm just saying, maybe go talk to an attorney, get their advice. Now, I am neither an HR person nor an attorney, so take that for what it's worth. You know, the other option is you could quietly quit. In other words, just do the bare minimums. But that really is a matter of conscience, and it doesn't sound, Arnelle, from what you just read in terms of the question, that's who that person is.
Yeah.
So I guess the end of my answer would be this: you do have choices. If you feel like you are being discriminated against, or there is this quiet firing going on, then submit your resignation and go find a better job, because there are people out there and there are companies out there who will appreciate the experience and the skill set that you bring. I promise you.
So you brought up a lot of really great points in your answer. But one of the things between like quiet firing and then now what people are calling quiet quitting, I've read up on both of them, and I feel as though with quiet firing, it's more so people just don't want to outright say, okay, we don't want you on this team, or like we don't no longer want you on the company, whatever it may be, which in turn can cause a lot more conflict amongst the team and in the culture of the company. So it's tough to navigate. But in terms of quiet quitting, me, and this could be my opinion alone, I feel as though that's more so you're just doing your job, then that's just doing your job responsibilities. That's how it should be, but it's not in our work, because it's seen as this big like hustle culture where it's like we're gonna keep going and going above and beyond, but then we kind of come to this situation where we're either being quietly fired or we're just not being recognized for the work that we're doing. So it does put strain on any professional in any field where it's just like, what do I do to get out of it?
Well, I think, you know, the idea of being quiet when it comes to your job is, I kind of rail against that. Now, maybe you can just sit back and you can kind of just patiently wait to see if in fact, finally somebody says we don't need you around here any longer. But I don't know. I feel like being proactive is kind of the thing to do. And I see in the comments, the book Radical Candor. That's kind of a philosophy, I suppose. I've never actually, read that book, but I think radical candor is what's called for. But again, I reiterate, you need to try to keep the focus on the issue, not allow emotions to take over. And so just from a standpoint of meeting with your supervisor, for example, using things like I statements are good. Active listening, reflecting what you're hearing the other person saying. What I hear you saying is, all right. And again, maybe that even sounds cliche, but I think it beats, my screen here. It beats pointing fingers and getting all red in the face, right? So you certainly don't want to do that. But I think also it comes to the point, the two other things that come to mind. One is you do have to take care of yourself. You've got to take care of your own emotional and mental well-being. And if a job is getting in the way of that, then certainly that is a factor to consider as well. But then I think the other thing is, do you sit back and patiently wait to see if anything happens? Can you sort of put all of this out of your mind and just do your job to the best degree possible, which means that you come to your work with a good attitude. And, a lot of factors come into play there. How well do you like what you do, for example? Do you enjoy this job? Is it reflective of the skills that you bring? Do you feel you get great satisfaction from the work you do? All of those are factors that you have to bring into the mix here. And I think, it's something that you don't have a knee-jerk reaction. Give yourself some time to think about it. Even take a few days if you need to away to think about it, and then make the decision.
I like that answer.
But employer, don't quiet fire. Just be honest with people.
Yeah. I feel like especially in this day and age where everybody is about transparency, where transparency it's such a big thing in a lot of different aspects of work, where just recently New York just passed a law where all jobs and job postings have to have the pay scales on their job postings. So people are aware of like what is actually being offered. But even in terms of that, it's starting at sales transparency, but it also needs to go, like, transparency has to go from the bottom and up. It has to go throughout the entire organization. And that includes whether or not you want to still keep certain people on your team, or if they're not performing well, you have to be able to just outright say, hey, this is not working. And either come up with a way or a plan where you guys can work to get to the point where it's to the company standards, or just find out a different solution. So I really do think that a big thing about it, especially with quiet firing, is just don't do it.
Right.
Transparent.
Right.
Just be like, speak up, So yeah, we actually do have a question, and it's from James.
Yep.
So he says, Paul, what's a common conflict you've seen in recent years between content marketing teams and their freelancers? What makes those employer-freelancer relationships challenging, and how can content marketing leaders be proactive in solving them?
Yeah. I'm just trying to think my own experience as a freelancer working with companies, brands, agencies, and things like that. I can't say that I personally have seen a lot of conflict. One company I did work for, I was the sort of the content marketing director, working with clients, things like that. And we did hire some freelancers. Again, I don't know that I would use the word conflict per se, but I would say that you do need to be clear on what everyone's role is. Okay. If you're bringing in a freelancer, then it's obviously there's a gap or a skill set that's missing with your content team for which a freelancer is required. So I think, just to answer the question kind of in brief, because I'm really trying to process it while I'm talking here, I think you really have to make sure that your content, well, first of all, make sure your content team is on board with the idea of bringing on freelancers. Maybe you might even reach out to your content team and ask, do they know anyone who could fit such and such role, that where, again, there's a gap or a need to be filled. I think from the freelancer side of the equation, the freelancer really needs to feel as if they are a part of the team. Okay. To the degree that's possible. Obviously, somebody like me, I'm a freelancer with my own little thing going, I get an agency or a company that wants to use me for whatever reason. It makes me feel good if they really kind of embrace me, or even using terminology like, our team, where it's more inclusive, right? I'm not just this outside person who's got very little, skin in the game, or a little stake in the game, right? Right. I'll give you an example right now. I have one client I'm working with where they made me a part of the team to the degree that I'm using their email, for myself. So from their client standpoint, they don't know that I'm not a part of the company. So I guess in all of that, I'm trying to say, make sure everybody understands everybody else's role. Make sure everybody's on board about it. Try to make that freelancer feel like he or she is a part of the team as much as possible, and, express value and appreciation for their work beyond just giving them a paycheck. So
I like that. But that also, in that last part, express gratitude, that also goes for your full-time employees as well.
Well, yeah, true.
Like, you got to express that gratitude all around, because that can make a real big difference.
Kind of it wasn't a quiet firing situation, but I will talk about one. I was a part of a nonprofit years ago, and I was feeling a little bit, I don't know, maybe a little bit unappreciated. There was not a lot of appreciation being shown, and maybe I was letting my feelings get hurt, wearing my feelings on my sleeve kind of thing. And I remember the CEO or the founder of the organization coming to me, and he said, very matter-of-factly, you get your appreciation every 2 weeks. By that, of course, he meant a paycheck. And that was it. I didn't say anything else.
That is not appreciation.
As long as I get that appreciation, I'm happy, if that appreciation that form of appreciation stops, then, oh, well, I'll have to do something else. But as a matter of fact, I've had a very good run with that company, and to the point where I felt like I needed to step out on my own, do kind of my own thing. A little bit of an entrepreneurial spark, kicked in there. And so I did. But that was the appreciation he felt like I needed to understand I was being shown. So.
See, when you're getting paid for the work you're doing, that's not appreciation. That's just illegal. That's supposed to happen.
Yeah,
you're supposed to get paid for the work you're doing.
Well,
but that's a whole nother conversation.
That is a whole other conversation.
And everything. But we actually do have another question, and this one comes from Troy. And he says, Paul, as a freelancer, how can a company help you get up to speed on product or market knowledge to eliminate or minimize the back and forth? Common for outsourced writers to provide some content, but the company feels that it's not quite targeted correctly. How can we help you, the freelancer, avoid this?
Well, he mentions writing, and thank you for that question, Troy. He mentions writing specifically, so I'm going to respond in that way. First of all, I think, there's sort of I don't know if there's an appropriate term, sort of a meta level at which you can help integrate the freelancer into sort of the company's culture, philosophy, mindset, policies, and all of that. And there's, I'm sure, plenty of documentation that you could give them that would be helpful. Also, if there's a style guide that you adhere to, putting that in their hands will be helpful with them. Having, obviously, meetings on a somewhat regular basis to make sure their questions are being answered, or to share anything with them that you feel is necessary. But I will tell you, when it comes down to writing specifically, for me, nothing is better than giving me a good brief to work from. And believe me, I've had briefs that are one sentence long, and it was like, what am I supposed to do with this? You know, I've had other briefs that were literally the entire article pretty much written kind of an outline form, and I just had to flesh it out, right? I love those kind, actually. Well, no, really, I don't, because sometimes they're harder to work with than others. But a good brief that has kind of a working title, that has a summary of the big idea, right? Here's the big idea, the topic we're discussing, the point we want to get across. Give me some bullet points, maybe talking points that you feel are the major things I need to focus on. Maybe give me some references to resources that I could do for research or cite, or maybe give me references for resources that you think are kind of a good fit with what you're saying. You know, if there's keywords you want me to focus on, give me those keywords. What else? Oh, who's the audience I'm writing for? That's a huge one right there. You know, I have one client that it could be two audiences. It could be company executives, and the article is intended for them, or it could be, in this case, healthcare practitioners like doctors and nurse practitioners, et cetera. It could be for them. Well, that's kind of two different audiences, and I need to know which one I'm focusing on, right? Mm-hmm. So I think those are some of the elements that you certainly want to include. I think also the idea of SEO. Is this an article that is going to be, or a piece of copy, whatever it might be, it could be an ebook, I suppose, that is going to be really one that we want to try to get a lot of SEO traction from, you know, so you really need to kind of think in those terms. Or also, where is it going to fit along the buyer journey or sales funnel, whichever term, marketing funnel, whichever term you want to use? Is it an awareness piece? Well, that's going to have one flavor. Is it middle of the funnel? That's going to have another flavor. Is it bottom of the funnel? So if you can kind of identify all of those sort of parameters and include those in a brief, it doesn't have to be pages and pages long. It could be one page. That's all it's needed. But that's enough to give the writer enough information to know what to work with, so that you're not going back and revising and revising and revising and revising. Okay. And I've been fortunate in that regard. When I get a brief like that, usually not more than one revision is ever called for, because you've given me the information I need. It's up to me to do the research, the investigation, perhaps interviews if that's called for as well. And then I can kind of take it from there. And also, and I mentioned style guide, and you know, your voice. What voice do you want me to sort of give this? Is it more casual, informal, or is it more, you know, kind of formalized business writing? And part of that's going to have to do with the industry you're in, I suppose. And again, also your target audience. You know, had one client where I was writing for these engineer guys, these programmers. Well, I was way over my head in that, way out of my element in that regard, but at least I knew who I was writing for. So anyway, there's that.
I think that was very valuable insight. I do believe that one sentence. I would love to hear the story. Maybe, I don't know if we have enough time now, but
well, this person
another time for one sentence.
This person is very short and brief and to the point with any of her stuff. But we've worked out a healthy balance now, and I pretty well kind of got an understanding of you know, what it is. But she continues to send me work, and she pays quickly and well. So I got no complaints. Look, I got no complaints.
I completely understand that. And I think we have at least time for one more question. Okay. And this is actually going back to our popular questions. Okay. And this one is on job security, which I think is very, very important, especially with everything that has been going on in the tech world specifically.
Yeah.
So this marketer writes in, they said, I've been working as a B2B marketer in tech since I graduated from college 5 years ago. It's not always fun, but I have thought of it as stable, and I've gotten steady raises. Now I'm seeing all these announcements about layoffs, and I'm wondering just how safe this career path actually is. If we really do head into a recession, what can I do to improve my odds of keeping a steady job?
Okay, that's certainly a valid question, and one to be concerned about now. And especially that's true, I think, if you're working in the tech industry. But let me just say, marketing has always been kind of a volatile career path to follow. I mean, in good times and bad, and certainly now with this recession going on, again, it's another adage or maybe a cliche is when times are tough, marketers are the first to go. I think that's short-sighted on the company's part, but nonetheless. So what do you do to kind of hedge your bet and try to ensure to the degree possible that you're not going to be part of that layoff group? Well, I think one of the things you got to do, first of all, is you got to really learn what your supervisor and your company value and play to that. Now, that may seem like a little bit of a scheming kind of way to do it, but I'll just give you an example. If you don't mind, I'm giving a lot of personal examples, but hey, I've been at this a long time. I had a marketing role where the supervisor was the vice president of business development. He was head of sales. Okay. His priority, first and foremost, excuse me, was to generate a sufficient number of sales qualified leads. He wanted to keep that pipeline filled. To him, that was the sum total of my role. Now, as marketers, we know there's more to marketing than that. There's branding, there's driving customer loyalty, all of that sort of thing. It's more than just driving leads, but to him, that was the thing that was most important. So I needed to be paying attention to that if I expected to keep my job. And so I would say, what is it that your company values? What is it your supervisor values? I will tell you, ultimately, you've got to prove your worth. And proving your worth means, how is what you're doing driving revenue? How is it helping our bottom line? I mean, ultimately, I'm cutting to the chase here, but ultimately, that's really what it comes down to. But I think also building rapport with your supervisor or the management team, having those water cooler conversations, so to speak, that's an important thing to do, because while it may not keep you from getting laid off, if it comes down to between you and another person, maybe that personal relationship that you've cultivated over time might help you. So think about that. Also, I don't know how often you might be responsible for reporting to supervisor or leadership. Maybe you're doing, a biweekly sprint, or maybe you're doing weekly check-ins, or, that kind of thing. But I would say this: it never hurts to over communicate. In my opinion, it doesn't. Unless your supervisor tells you, look, you don't need to tell me this every time, or, every little thing, right? But just sticking your head in their door sometimes and saying, hey, we had this win, or here's what's been going on, just wanted you to know. Those are good things that you can do to, again, kind of help yourself. Also, be proactive, be first to the plate. If there's something to be done, maybe volunteer to do it. If there's a leadership role to take on, maybe you express your willingness to own that, or whatever. If there's extra work, maybe, I don't mean beat yourself up, okay, or put too much of a burden on yourself, obviously, but if you can do it, then do it. I mean, ultimately, yeah, again, being a marketer in uncertain times is tough, and so those are some things maybe to think about as you want to hold on to what you're doing. Obviously, good job performance never hurts, but today I wouldn't say it's an antidote to being laid off. So think about some of those things.
And what I will add, I'm not a content therapist, but what I will add is that sometimes you can do all that and it still does happen. It's not a reflection on you. Unfortunately, it's just sometimes how the economy is, how the business is, and frankly, how they're going. And if you are a marketer who has experienced this, I do encourage you to head over to the managing editor job board. We do have a lot of incredible positions listed there from different companies who are doing really great things. Because getting laid off is not great, but it does open a door for another opportunity to come in. And I do know that sounds like a cliche, but I promise it's true.
Or you could become a freelancer and do your own thing and pick the clients that you work with and set your own rates and do the work that you love, from the beauty of from your own home, as it were, maybe, now that everybody's having to go back to an office, but you could do that.
Yes. And we actually had Grace drop the link to the job board in the chat. So please head over, check it out. We have a lot of amazing jobs on there, and we do update it frequently. So keep an eye out for any role that you're interested in. And we are actually at time. Paul,
All right.
awesome. I'm really glad we got to do this, and thank you to everybody who was watching and people who contributed questions. We really do appreciate it. And if you do have more questions that you didn't ask here, I believe Grace also dropped the email that you can send us.
Ask questions.
We love questions.
Read the column, ask questions.
It is a monthly advice column, so please watch out for the column, and any questions, send us our way, and we will send that. We will make sure to put it in the next advice column. All right.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Guys.
All right. Enjoyed it. Thank you.